Oi, oi, alright, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you, and this is Doodle Review, a channel that talks about all types of music, but we're alt-rock fiends first and foremost. We pretty much review something in the rock category every other day, so if that's your vibe, subscribe. You'll definitely hear me talk about a band you love in an upcoming video, and maybe you might find something new that you will love. Today we're talking about the indie rock legends Pixies. So Bossanova, the band's third album, might seem like a random album to review given that it's almost seen as the middle child of the band's classic era. And that's kind of the reason that I'm reviewing it, because despite being familiar with kind of roughly 80% of the Pixies catalogue, Bossanova is just a record that, for whatever reason, I've always skipped over. And it's really weird because it's sandwiched right in the middle of Doolittle and Trompe le Monde, both of which I'd consider as firm favourites from the band. Glazing over the record could be down to, I guess, kind of absorbing the passing online commentary I might have seen over the years and somehow kind of creating my own narrative that, because of a troubled writing and recording process, this record somehow represents the nadir of the band's initial run. Having now listened and read up on the album, that assumption did turn out to be partially correct, but with only a very loose interpretation of the word nadir, because this album is still pretty great. It's pretty great, but in comparison to what came before and after Bossanova, it really comes across as rushed and loose. Releasing this only a year after Doolittle might on the face of it seem like the cause of that, but actually the short duration between releases was nothing new for the band. Between Come On Pilgrim in 1987 and Trompe le Monde in 1991, the band released pretty much an album a year, but this genuinely seems like the only record that bears the mark of a hurried songwriting process. Digging into the production reveals some interesting facts that could provide some reasoning behind this. The first of which being, well, it was rushed. The timeline is crazy. The band started recording in February 1990 with the first single released in July and the album released in August. And that in itself is not a timeline that's far from other Pixies releases with the short time frames they work to, but on Bossanova, for the first time, the band had almost no material kind of worked up before that February start date. So that means the album was written, recorded, mixed, mastered, pressed up and released in 6 months, and that's fast. Add to that for half the recording sessions, the band weren't able to record after 6 p.m. because the equipment at Cherokee Studios in Los Angeles would start picking up nearby pirate radio stations, and this was an issue that was eventually resolved by Rick Rubin, no less, who set them up at another studio when it put too much strain on sessions. All of this coming from, Wikipedia, by the way, which, as we know, is the fountain of 100% incorruptible truth. Not, but let's just assume there probably isn't some nefarious kind of villain out there interfering with Pixies album articles. Back to the subject at hand, though, this album was an album created by a band working up songs almost immediately prior to recording, if not during, with frontman Frank Black, by his own admission, sometimes writing lyrics just 5 minutes before stepping into the booth. So with all that understood, the quick assembly and the recording challenges, Bossanova honestly is kind of a miracle record. It's a miracle and shows the magic this band had in their heyday, in that it's still so listenable, despite at points being a little aimless. The songs to me fall into two camps, either classic, short, sharp Pixies indie rock rippers, and then there's some spooky, meandering kind of vibe tracks that kind of stumble their way through the given runtime, sometimes stumbling upon gold, other times just being fine. As if to signify the record's let's just slap some songs out, get together and get it out attitude, the record opens with the 1-2 punch of Cecilia Ann and rock music. The former being a surf rock cover, which likely came second nature to a band having mangled their way through their own version of Dick Dale surf music for their entire career, and the second a song with a title that gives the impression of producer Gil Norton kind of sat in the control room shouting at a last minute direction like, "We need another banger." If that's what actually happened, well, the band certainly delivered. Black Francis has never sounded so ferocious, and despite the lyrics reading as "your mouth's a mile away," I can't ever not hear him shout "Shamoun!" Michael Jackson style, which either way works for me. On both of these tracks, and in fact the whole album, drummer Dave Lovering sounds more kinetic, aggressive and dialed in than he ever has, which kind of all adds to the chaotic messiness of the record. And of course, we can't do a review of the Pixies classic era without kind of talking about the band dynamics. At the time, it may not have been a consideration, but with 30 years hindsight and a far better understanding of the turbulent relationship between the band members, most significantly Kim Deal and Frank Black, it's hard to approach a review of Bossanova without this in mind. So much of the magic of Pixies' earliest materials is down to the lightning in a bottle combination of Frank Black's wildly unpredictable vocal presence, growling, screaming, or sweetly singing at a moment's notice, and then the straight, consistent, but pretty much heavenly upper register harmonies from the group's bassist Kim Deal. To my mind, Deal's contribution and the dynamic she brought to the group was as fundamental to the band's success as Frank Black's oddball sensibilities. The interplay of this yin and yang pairing is what imbued Come On Pilgrim, Surfer Rosa and Doolittle with the electricity that those albums still bear to this day. Bossanova, though, seems to mark a turning point that sees Kim Deal's presence on the recordings far more subdued, not just audibly, but in a weird way kind of spiritually. And I know that that's probably just my brain leaping to make connections because we know now that she would ultimately leave the band, but I can swear I just hear like a lack of energy from Deal in terms of the songwriting of the record, and same with Trompe Le Monde compared to those that came before. And it's hard to know how much of this reduced impact is down to Deal ultimately being distracted by her own band, The Breeders, who were finishing up recording their classic record Pod while the rest of the band started this album, or is it that Frank Black and the remaining band were actually just kind of inviting less of Deal's contribution due to their frustration at her split focus. While Kim Deal would ultimately remain in the band through the recording and release of the next album, and would even, which is surprising in hindsight, be part of the band's reunion in 2004 after their 10-year split, all the way until 2013, there is undoubtedly a shift in the band dynamic in the second half of this lineup's recorded output, with Bossanova, I think, the starting point. Bass playing aside, Deal's presence really isn't felt on this record until the third track, Valoria, a strange, melancholy song where, honestly, Deal's backing vocals might really be the most important ingredient, because without them, it's hard to pin down the hook or determine what makes this song as captivating as it is. It really underlines the vitality of Deal's contribution to this band. Her vocals are peppered throughout the album from this point, but more as a backing vocalist rather than the anchoring presence she is on Valoria, and I can't escape the thought that her kind of two-song absence at the start of the record feels really purposeful and symbolic. Zooming out for a second, as I said, the tracks as a whole fall into two categories: classic Pixies rippers like Cecilia Ann, rock music, Valoria, kinda, Allison, Is She Weird, Dig for Fire and Hangwire, all great, and then some slower, meandering tracks where you really feel the band kind of writing as they go. Sometimes this really works. Anna has such a nice top-line guitar melody that you feel completely comfortable and happy just being wrapped in its hazy vibe. It's also nice to savour the duetting vocals of Deal and Black. On the other hand, we also get Stormy Weather, which falls into this category, which sounds like a band road testing some ideas in the studio. It has a couple of aspects I love, like the tempo switch up and guitar solo, but this definitely feels like they recorded a practice session to use as a reference point rather than the finished track. All Over the World is an interesting one because, again, it has some interesting aspects to it. I like the buzzing kind of sharp guitar accents in the verses and the long outro section with its different guitar riff and spoken word segment over Deal's vocal. It would be great, but I think we get a far superior version of this same track just a few songs later with The Happening. And this one is completely blindsided me, as potentially it's going up there with one of my favourite Pixies tunes ever. It's very slow burning and plodding. It captures a few of the things I've critiqued some of the other tracks for, but that chorus with the high vocal that pitches up and down is really cathartic and sounds great with Black singing over it at the end. It's funny because it follows the same structure and general vibe as All Over the World, but just does everything better. Overall, Bossanova feels a bit haphazard, a bit slapdash, and indicates some changing dynamics within the band, but ultimately it's still highly enjoyable, and I'm feeling a bang on 7 out of 10 for this one. Alright, that's enough for me chatting faff about the record. What do you think? Have you heard this one? What's your favourite Pixies record? Am I on the money here or not? do let me know in the comments, show some love, share some thoughts, or just wholesome abuse, and stop being cute, stop being coy. If you're loving this, hit subscribe. What are you doing? We've got more reviews than you can shake a stick at coming your way. Saturday special, Sunday jazz club. I'll see you at one of those. Cheers, mate. Bye.